Welcome to Powered by Ancestry. I'm your host and guide, Kwesi Kunadu. Last week we talked about the ancestral land. Where is it? What is it like? How does one get there? And I spoke a little bit about the concepts of karma, reincarnation as being inapplicable to my people and other African peoples in terms of their cosmological understanding about typically what those concepts imply. And I want to dig deeper into those matters with you regarding the choices we make in spiritual form that has implication for our physical human experience and our lives thereafter. That category of ancestors that do not go to the space or the place of ancestry, and those that particularly live out a violent life and have a violent death, I want to be very clear here. We're not talking about karma. You see, karma has the notion of someone will essentially live out a preordained or predestined life that will lead to the same end regardless of what they do in life. And in fact, in karma, particularly in the Hindu version of karma, one will essentially become reborn into either a bird or a tree or a human being. What we're referring to here is something quite different. We're talking about human beings. So this is about human experience. So no, we don't revolve back through a door that we become some animal or some plant or some feature of the natural world. We are talking about people who in fact are vetted and returned through their particular lineage in some way or shape. Now, for those that live a life of violence, either they dish out the violence or they're inflicted by the violence, it doesn't matter, and lead to a violent death, and we can define violence broadly speaking, it means that they in fact were part and parcel of choosing the destiny that led to the same end. In other words, as you might recall from our discussion about the negotiated destinies that we have with the creative force of the cosmos, there's a commanded destiny that is given to us, essentially a path laid out by both ancestral and spiritual forces that have our backs, that are trying to put us on the path. But we have a say in this, which is the Increbia, which is the one we lead us before we depart that place where we have this conversation, perhaps during our mother's womb in gestation. And that's the one where we have a say in what we want to do. And at times, what we want to do conflicts with what the ancestral and spiritual forces want us to do. But that's our choice. And so when we make that choice, whether there's a conflict between the two destinies or the destiny we choose overrides or outweighs the commanded one, or in some cases reneges or conflicts with the commanded one, that one leads to these violent ends. And so whether the violence be, for example, a woman dying in childbirth, or a child being hit by a vehicle, or in the case of an uncle of mine who I'll leave unnamed, he lived a very violent life. He killed several people doing his human experience. In one case, as he told me, he dressed as a woman. I don't know how, because he wasn't a handsome man, but anyway, he dressed as a woman and was able to get into the house of this man who he ended up murdering. And that was just one of several human lives that he took. For that, in his hand, he was found burnt to a crisp after being shot and burnt in his car. And so that violent life and that violent death is simply a concrete example plucked from my family history that I'm sure you may have examples from your family history where this violent death happens without any immediate explanation to say, why did that happen to that person? And I know we hear it often. Such and such died too young. Such and such was a very good person. That has nothing to do with, by way of explanation, to what really happened. What really happens is, again, we're not talking about karma. We're talking about the choices we made in spiritual form while we're having this negotiated conversation, as you will, with this massive force in the cosmos that is part and parcel of us having our human experience. And so before we get here, meaning the earth, we make choices about the shape and the path and the road that we're going to take and what happens on that path on the road. And so we don't have anyone else to hold responsible but ourselves. And so how can we do something about the recurrence of this violent life and death? Well, there has to be intervention, both on the human side and on the spiritual side. And there are rituals in which to intervene for this person. In some cases there aren't. Those persons will be counted among the condemned souls, meaning that they cannot be called upon and should never be called upon during ritual libation, during other rituals or ceremonies that involve invoking or involving spiritual forces. Because if you do, you're inviting that violence into your world. And you may not be ready for what you're inviting. The key here for us to take away is that we have more agency in shaping the kind of life that we live and the kind of quote unquote afterlife that our spiritual form will live out. And so these individuals who live a violent life, who do not live out their purpose and destiny, who essentially take shortcuts or do not accomplish their purpose and mission as commanded and as in which they laid out, they in fact occupy this indeterminate place. And when and if they are recycled or reborn within the matriarch clan, within the matriarch lineage, that is the mother's lineage of their family, then they will live out a life to the same end without any spiritual and ritual intervention. It can be done, but it's a serious task, and for some, that task will not help them because they have cycled in and out of the same kind of violence and eventually they become that violence. They are violence incarnate, which explains, by the way, if you ever had this question anyway, and of course I did, why do we have such violence reoccurring in the world? It's not evil. It's really the constellation of violent lives and violent death that essentially is recycled. Remember, energy can't be destroyed. It can only be reconstituted or recycled. And so in spiritual form and as spiritual forces and spiritual beings, which is what we are, even occupying this physical form. And of course, this physical form is simply the densification of that energy. The same way that water can freeze into a solid block called ice. The world is really filled with people for whom we have not done the proper rituals. And so we lived a life on this planet suffused with people who have not been given the proper burial or the proper rituals to send them home in the way they should be. And so what happens? We then pollute and populate our world with those incomplete beings that are filled with violence incarnate. If we're able to do the rituals of sending people back home to their spiritual home, the world will be a much different place. My argument is this, for you to think about, is that this is beyond karma, this is beyond reincarnation. This is about the choices we make in spiritual form that has implications for our physical human experience and thereafter. I've been your guide and host, Kwesi Konadu. This has been another episode of Powered by Ancestry. Kindly put your comments, questions, and ideas for other episodes in the comment box below. Looking forward to seeing another episode. Stay well.